Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. Those words by renowned existentialist philosopher Soren Kierkegaard frame our county seat episode today as we talk about the value of artifacts in the context of the field where they're found, not the museum or gallery where they end up. For years, the bigger picture of history and cultures were lost as archaeological gems were plucked from sites by people more interested in the art of the object as opposed to its history. About 120 years ago, that all started to change when a movement began to solve the mysteries of the ancient Puebloan culture who suddenly vanished from the Southwest United States. And that led to the creation of the Antiquities Act of 1906, which is where our dig begins today with Maggie Kay.
In the last year or two, we have heard a lot about the Antiquities Act and how it authorizes the President of the United States to reserve tracts of federal land under special protection called national monuments. Speaking of national monuments, I think you'll find these facts rather interesting. First of all, there are 117 of them, the smallest being 1/3 of an acre and the largest being more than 3/4 the size of Alaska. It is called Papahenaumokuakea. It stretches from Hawaii to Midway Island in the Pacific. However, the vast majority of monuments are under 5,000 acres. In fact, it wasn't until December 1st, 1978, that any monument was larger than 1 million acres with the creation of the Admiralty Island National Monument. That was the same day that President Carter set the record for creating the most monuments in one day. 11 of them. He must have been exhausted. President Obama holds the record for creating the most monuments, 34 to be exact. Here is another interesting fact. Since the year 2000, 768 million acres of new monuments have been created. That is twice the size of Alaska. Before the year 2000, all monuments combined came up to about half the size of Delaware. There seems to be a lot of commotion about whether the Antiquities Act allows a president to change or modify a monument, or whether it gives him the authority to declare whatever size monument he feels like declaring. So let's dive into the intricate inner workings of the Antiquities Act of 1906 to see where all of this controversy comes from. What I found surprised me. The entire Antiquities Act consists of 5 paragraphs, 6 sentences, and is only 419 words long. In fact, only one sentence deals with the creation of a monument. It says, "The President of the United States is authorized, in his discretion, to declare by public proclamation historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures, and other objects of historic or scientific interest that are situated upon the lands owned or controlled by the government of the United States to be national monuments, and may reserve as part thereof parcels of land, the limits in which all cases shall be confined to the smallest area compatible with the proper care and management of the objects to be protected." The bigger part of the Antiquities Act says that people who excavate, injure, or destroy any historic or prehistoric ruin, or any object of antiquity on public land without permission of the U.S. government, shall be fined and imprisoned. It further states in paragraph 3 that a permit is required to excavate and gather artifacts from archaeological sites and gather objects. Those objects will only be given to reputable museums, universities, colleges, or any other recognized scientific or educational institution, and that all the objects must then be kept in public museums. That pretty much sums up the whole Antiquities Act of 1906 and leaves us in a good place to pick up the conversation about how we protect these objects and artifacts between the site and the museum. But we will dig into that when we come back. For the County Seat, I'm Maggie Kay.
All local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover flavors you've never tasted and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own Discover Local Food.
In a place that is beyond words, there is nothing to be said, except Take your time in Bryce Canyon country.
Mountains to explore. Adventure to be had. A town to fall in love with. Yes, all that in Park City, Utah. Start planning your fall adventure at visitparkcity.com.
Too often we find ourselves in shoes like these, or these. Wouldn't it be nice to change into something more like this, or this? How about these? Put on whatever shoes you prefer and come to Beaver County. We have exactly the adventure you need to put under them. So the next time you want to change out of these, come to Beaver County where you can jump into a pair of these. Beaver County, Utah. Lace up for adventure.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking about archaeology and the problems we have with curating and protecting archaeological resources across the state. Joining us for our conversation part of the show today is Sean Lambert, who is the public archaeologist for the state of Utah, and Nathan Thomas, the lead archaeologist for the Bureau of Land Management. Thank you both for taking the time to come and talk with us.
Fantastic to be here.
The issue that got us all together here was vandalism and looting, and the problem of protecting archaeological history, and it's apparently been widespread. But I want to focus a little bit to start the conversation on vandalism. Is all vandalism or most vandalism that takes place intentional?
No, I would say that over 90% of the vandalism is probably not intentional. They're probably doing something that they're not stepping on a site, maybe inscribing their name on a rock face that may have rock art that they can't see. So a lot of what they're doing...
Well, that would still be vandalism.
It's still vandalism, but they are unaware they may be doing or defacing an archaeological resource. So
if somebody walks into one of these Chinese campsites from on the railroad grade, I picked that because in our other show we were just out there recently, and you see a shard of porcelain, you pick it up, you look at it, you put it back. Have you just messed up history?
I mean, to be very strict, the law says anyone who excavates, illegally collects, damages, or destroys archaeological resources, that's against the law. Mm-hmm. But just looking at the artifact, picking it up, and placing it right back down where you found it, that's not illegal. But archaeologists are really sensitive. They want to know exactly where that artifact came from. So for me as an archaeologist, it's really important that archaeology artifacts stay in the same place. If the artifact is on this side of the table versus that side of the table, that's a big difference for us.
Say for instance, if they pick that artifact up in one room of a Pueblo house and they moved it 20 feet and it's in another section of that Pueblo house or another site, it totally loses its context and provenience. So as archaeologists, it would totally disrupt how we see what was going on in the past, what people were doing in specific areas of that site. So
for people who enjoy and explore the outdoors, this puts a large onus on them to be careful when they come across something. And you made a point of picking it up, putting it right back. You're saying putting it right back in the place that it is. Should people be afraid to look at something that they discover?
I don't think they should be afraid. I mean, I use that example because that's the most important rule in archaeology. It's the same in real estate, which is location, location, location. So that's pretty important to us for telling that story. But no, I think as people learn a little bit more about archaeology, they learn about how to respect it, and they can come into areas and not touch the rock art, not take artifacts home. Just be careful where you walk. Yeah, I think that they can come in and enjoy. I mean, Utah is a great state. I mean, there's just amazing history here, amazing archaeology, and I love it.
Just to add to what Nate said, feel free also to take photos. If you're curious about what you picked up and you placed it back down, take a few photos, send it to the State History Office or to the BLM archaeologist, and we can help you and interpreting what you found.
Do you like that kind of input from people?
Definitely. I think there are specific apps that are being created in Utah now, like Friends of the Cedar Mesa and others, where they'll be able to download this app, and then the public actually be able to take pictures and become stewards of where they live around them. And they'll be able to take pictures, send it back, and then they'll help us document new sites or redocument old sites that we've surveyed 50, 60 years ago. So we can engage with the public so that they can help us preserve those sites.
I want to talk about the context of archaeology too, because I just mentioned an old miner's camp. Is Swayze's cabin any less archaeology than, say, Defiance House?
No, I would say that one material culture is not more important or has less research value than another material culture. So if you found a historic can in one cabin, and you walk around and you find a 12,000-year-old Clovis point, those to archaeologists do not have any less value to them. We look at them the same. If they're older than 50 years, then we deem them as an artifact, and they both have research value. But to the public, they may seem different because of the age of those artifacts, and that's something that archaeologists can come in and talk to the public and say that these artifacts, and no matter when they were found or when they were made or when they were produced, but they have a story behind them. The specific people manufactured them, specific people used them and reused them and then passed them down. And then as archaeologists, we can reconstruct that rich narrative. And if we give those narratives to the public, and I think that's the point at which we can connect with the public and get them interested in the wonderful history that Utah has. It's about 13,000 years of history in Utah.
Yeah. My first experience in historical archaeology happened when I was a Boy Scout. Our Scoutmaster took us up to the Park City mines, where we got to see, the mine shafts and the mines themselves. And as a 11-year-old boy, I thought that was just awesome, to hear all the historic stories and the folklore behind mining. It's really neat. And as I have, progressed in education and understanding of archaeology in Utah, I'm in love with all of it. There's from the Pueblo sites in the southeast corner of the state to the railroad sites that we visited together. One's not more valuable than the other. It's just depending on kind of who's looking at it and the lens they're looking at, which is a good point, because we need to be respectful of the prehistoric sites and the historic sites.
So one of the things that has been expressed as a concern to me from people who are responsible for curating a lot of information is that somebody will permit to go out a college or university to do a dig, and they'll go on a site and they'll start collecting data and they'll start gathering it in boxes, and it'll go back and it'll sit in the university and the professor teaching a class, and he's probably interrupted by Indiana Jones a few times, and he gets back to it, and then he gets old and he dies, and all his stuff is in boxes, and his widow ends up with it. She doesn't know what to do with it, and then it tries to go back to a university, and then they have the problem of trying to put this legally acquired archaeology back into context. And apparently, the Utah Museum of Natural History is just backlogged with thousands of hours of work just to get caught up. Yeah. How do you solve that problem? I mean, and how destructive is that to our full understanding of history?
Moving forward, we're taking it bit by bit. I think as we as an agency of the BLM, when we hear those situations and those collections are from BLM lands, we're working with those universities to find funding so that they're properly curated.
I think when you compare the archaeological work that's been done maybe during the WPA era in the late 1930s, early 1940s, and compare it to the rigorous digital databases that we have and that we have control of, I mean, we're seeing a lot less of the misuse and of these cultural resources, and that it's harder and harder to misplace these items as time goes on. So we're inventing new ways to make sure that we never lose that context or provenience of those artifacts.
And we're doing more digital, more scanning.
Exactly, and a lot more non-destructive archaeology with drones, with satellites now, with 3D technology, 3D modeling, 3D printing. So we're doing a lot of things now that we don't even have to, as GPR, so ground penetrating radar, that we can see what's going on under the ground without even having to dig anymore. So we're doing a lot that we're impacting the ground a lot less now these days.
So here's a question, and I know this has come up particularly with some of the Native American cultures. They want their stuff back. And the Antiquities Act and some of the subsequent acts say, okay, we're going to collect this material, and it's going to be done by permit. It's only going to be done by people who are authorized to do it. We're going to curate it, and it's going to stay in a museum. What effort are we making to try and keep those valuable pieces of history closer to the local communities where they come from?
So right now, when we have an archaeology firm or a university come into the state of Utah, they get a curation agreement, and we're requiring that that curation agreement is within university here in the state. And so, well, and I should say there may be a few exceptions, a few universities that are just outside of Utah, but on a whole, those institutions are curating within the state. Another thing that we do is before we do any, we permit any sort of excavation, we require tribal consultation. So we require the field office to go out and speak with the tribes and let them know that this excavation is occurring and solicit their input.
I worked in Oklahoma for 7 years in the public archaeology sector when I was finishing my PhD, and I worked with 26 of the 39 federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma. And what I've learned is when you do tribal consultation, you just need to ask questions, and they'll tell you if they're interested or not in wanting these materials back, and then that repatriation process can start after that. As archaeologists, it gets harder to understand cultural affiliation the older it gets. So if we have maybe an archaic or a paleo site, it's really hard for us to know which tribe that are living today has ownership of that. So we do our due diligence and try to contact as many Native American tribes as possible.
I would imagine that if you had a Fremont dig, there could be 3 or 4 different tribes that are listing today.
Yes.
Those are ours. No, those are ours. No, those belong to us.
And they have really strong ties to those artifacts, for sure. But I want to point out, though, that if there are artifacts that are found on public lands, like BLM-administered public lands, those are artifacts that belong to the American public, and that's the BLM's responsibility to manage those artifacts. So it's only when we have situations that are associated with human remains. And so if there's human remains, associated funerary objects that are found with the grave, that's when we bring in the tribes, and we try to do that cultural affiliation. But artifacts of themselves outside of a grave context are public resources.
Stay with us. We'll be back with the county seat. When we come back, we're actually going to go out on a dig and see how much care goes into dissecting history. We'll be back with the county seat in just a minute.
The Utah Farm Bureau began as a collection of farmers supporting each other to raise the food we enjoy. Today, Farm Bureau membership encompasses everyone, whether ranchers, growers, or just everyday folks like you and me. Members enjoy discounts on items like vehicles and ATVs, or insurance that's very affordable. You don't have to be a farmer to join, and dues are small, but together we make a big difference in keeping our food supply local and abundant. Join Utah Farm Bureau.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows, wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
Look south to adventure. Look south to beauty. Look south to San Juan County. Out here, the road goes on forever, and what you'll find will change how you see the world. Climb on your OHV and discover forgotten landscapes and vistas that challenge the imagination. From Blanding and Monticello to the cliff faces of Monument Valley, we're open and ready for you to explore. San Juan County, Utah's Canyon Country.
Welcome back to the county seat. In its most simple form, archaeology is the connection of one generation to another. Unknowingly, the Fremont Indians passed down their history and traditions to a later generation by simply moving on and not cleaning up after themselves. Took several hundred years to do it, but we have been able to learn a thing or two from them. Today, younger generations are still learning from older generations through archaeology, but not quite in the way you would think, as we visit a dig in 9 Mile Canyon with a youthful twist on the ground.
9 Mile Canyon in central Utah, south of Duchesne, is known for its majestic views, world-class ATV riding, and petroglyphs, such as the Great Hunt. It is also the site of some of the current archaeological digs dating back to the 1st century.
What we're doing is we're excavating one of the larger sites in the canyon. There's a series of vertically set stone boulders that form a large square that's about 4 meters by 5 meters in size. There's a small room inside of it, and what we're trying to do is getting local youth exposed to archaeological methods and the importance of conserving cultural resources for future generations.
Students from around the state of Utah are invited out to come and dig on location and learn the art and techniques of excavation in hopes of finding artifacts to piece together the puzzle of the history in 9 Mile Canyon.
So today, our school was invited to have some students come out and do an archaeology survey. So what we're doing is, you can see that we have them separated in our units, which are 2 meters by 2 meters. So then when we take a bucket out, then we sift it in our sifters over here, and then we look for the artifacts.
We excavated this last year. We're just above the floor of this room. It's got an intact clay floor. We don't know if it has anything buried within that floor, but we'll be finding that out this year as well, once we get some of the rest of this down.
Today, in this unit right here that's right behind me, we found a drill bit which they used for their bead making process. I think it's cool that they're having us kids do it, letting us do a chance like this, the possibility to just check out career ideas and just help the history behind these sites.
But it's important to get people involved in these types of projects, again, because these are non-renewable resources, and once they're gone, we're not going to either be able to visit them, learn anything from them, or even have them to enjoy from a recreational standpoint. This project's going on for a few more years in various stages. Anybody that's interested can go to our Facebook page and websites for 9 Mile Canyon volunteering, and you can go to the 9 Mile Stewardship Days and just get involved. The more people, the merrier.
We can learn a lot from these dig sites as to how the people lived, how they managed their land, and with proper care, we can preserve their stories for future generations to enjoy.
You know, watching those kids get excited about finding an ancient drill bit got me thinking, what are we going to leave behind that tells the story of our daily lives? This notion creates some interesting conundrums that we will take up when we come back on the county seat.
If you're looking for gold at the end of the rainbow, you'll probably be disappointed, because in Paiute County, the only thing you'll find at the end of a rainy day is the promise of adventure. Highway 89 is your access point through Marysville and the historic trails of Bouillon Canyon. Find yourself in the mountains 1 minute and the desert the next as you follow in the footsteps of the pioneers. Whitewater raft, fish, hike, all within a few minutes of a comfortable bed and a warm meal. Find out why the world has made Paiute County its off-road destination. Paiute County, the place where the rainbow ends.
There are meetings, and then there are gatherings. At the Davis Conference Center, we know the difference. Turn your event into something more than just another business summit. With over 70,000 square feet of flexible meeting space, state-of-the-art presentation amenities, and inspiring architecture, the Davis Conference Center is designed to deliver stellar results in a majestic setting. Take your convention to the next level. Schedule now at davisconferencecenter.com.
Welcome back to the county seat. We have taken a historical look at the roots of the awakening of the American archaeological movement and the need to protect artifacts, and more important, their geographical context. We can infer a great deal from that information if it is analyzed carefully. Today's modern digs even include extensive soil samples from a site to determine the weather, agricultural habits, even traces of disease that might have adversely affected their culture. When you think about it in this context, it becomes clear why the modern-day issues surrounding archaeological site protection and research have become so important. The secret to our future survival might actually be hidden in the relics of the past, literally. That's why careful scientific deconstruction of sites is so important today. But the question keeps coming up. In 3,000 years, when they come to excavate your neighborhood, what are they going to find? What will tell them about your daily life? Think about it. You don't leave your trash in the corner of your yard. Homes aren't abandoned anymore. They are either demolished or rebuilt, or the land is reclaimed. There most likely won't even be a group of kids and archaeologists digging around your family room getting excited over discovering a game controller. How are the archaeologists going to explain our culture through our artifacts? What are your thoughts about it? Would love to hear them. Anyway, thanks for tuning in on the County Seat. We put together this show each week to help make sense out of the community you live in and the things that directly affect your life. Do you think there's a topic that should be discussed and that's not being discussed? Let us know. And we'll see you next week on the County Seat.